Hello and welcome back to Kvikmyndapod, an Icelandic cinema podcast. I'm Rob Watts, and on this podcast, me and my good friend Ellie Cawthorne chat about Icelandic film. If you haven't already, take a listen to our short introductory episode where we reveal just how much or little we know and care about the country of Iceland. This week marks the start of our journey across the land of ice and fire as we begin to explore the types of stories being told in Icelandic film. Sadly, there are no volcanoes in this week's pick, Hrútar or rams from 2015, but there are a lot of sheep. So here we go. Hello, Ellie.
Hello again.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good.
Great. Well, we're going to kick things off this week, the first week, with Grímur Hákonarson's Rams. Have you seen this before?
Well, not before this week, I haven't. And what a way to kick things off. I think it's a really good one, isn't it?
It is. It's funny that. So it's all about Icelandic farmers and their sheep. Shall I start off with a synopsis?
Please do.
Okay, here we go. So, Rams tells a story of sheep farming brothers Gummi and Kiddi who live on neighbouring farms, but for reasons never really explained, haven't spoken to each other for a very long time. When Gummi's prize ram wins a local contest, Kiddi inspects it and suspects that it may have scrapie, a fatal disease that means all the sheep in the valley must be destroyed. This is a disaster for everybody whose livelihoods depend on sheep farming, but it might just be the catalyst for some sort of reconciliation.
See, when you put it on paper like that, it doesn't quite capture the spirit of the thing, does it? It's about sheep diseases.
Well, exactly. It's so weird because, I chose the film because it's sort of what people might imagine films set in Iceland are. Mm-hmm. It's about rural life, farming, sheep, and just sort of nature and old people. But it's not. It is about that, of course.
I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised because it had a lot more in it than I anticipated from a film about two grumpy old farts doing some sheep farming.
Quite. It is funny, isn't it? We said this in the intro. Icelandic humour is quite dark, almost to the point where you're not sure if anything is actually meant to be funny. Did you find this a comedy of any kind?
I wouldn't call it a comedy. I would say I found it a kind of moving, melancholic drama that occasionally had moments of humour in it. I wouldn't describe it as a black comedy.
Yeah, I think I watched it again for this podcast, and I'm sure that the first time I watched it, I was sort of just laughing along a little bit, just following it along, seeing what happens, and then at the end sort of realised the dramatic weight of everything. But this time, I realised it's much more sad and melancholy, like you say.
Yeah, I felt more than humour throughout, this kind of ominous tension, I would say, which to me is not necessarily combined with humour. Sometimes it is, but definitely there was more of a ominous melancholy vibe than a humorous vibe. But I definitely think there were moments, and I'm sure we'll talk about them later, that were pretty hilarious.
And so you were talking about that melancholic kind of tone, which you can see just from the single shot landscapes and shots of icy rivers and snowy valleys and all of this. But also the soundtrack is so evocative. It really, really creates this kind of atmosphere of loneliness and sadness that is really specifically Icelandic, I think. And I read an interview with the composer, whose name is Atli Örvarsson, who weirdly works in a lot of American TV, like those Chicago PD, Chicago Fire, long series.
Really?
Yeah, he does a lot of soundtrack work and in bigger kind of Hollywood films as well. So he became a producer on this, and he just used very Icelandic instruments that would have been found in the area and at the time. Like, I think he said He used strings, an accordion, which is really evocative, I think.
Like an old man wheezing, isn't it? The accordion.
It really
which is very apt.
And you don't hear it that much in general in life and in film. But in here, it's so slow and it's kind of a shrill noise, but I'm crap at describing music, but it's really kind of, it works perfectly for who we're looking at, where we are. And just that combined, with the strings, the organ, and then the sparse piano as it gets colder and colder and colder and things are looking more and more bleak. I just think it's kind of the perfect soundtrack for something set in that area of Iceland.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that the soundtrack was brilliant. And again, I know I keep saying this, but to me was really sinister somehow, really ominous. I think that like long wheezes of the accordion were quite tense.
Definitely. I think sinister, I wouldn't say, but ominous, definitely.
Yes.
They had that whole feeling of just like something is going to happen. You probably know what it is, but I'm going to keep reminding you that this is probably not going to be a good thing. And reminiscent of the loneliness and the sadness of just people living alone in the middle of nowhere with only sheep for company. It just works perfectly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The setup, two brothers, they've not spoken for 40 years. And that's never really explained, which is odd to begin with, considering they live on farms right next to each other. And they don't have any family except each other. They don't have any children, any wives. It's like the most lonely and isolating life you could possibly imagine. I mean, not that dissimilar to my life this past year or so, but...
Yeah. Do you know what? I was going to say that there's some serious lockdown vibes going on here. Like when they're, sat at home alone, doing a bit of woodwork,
puzzles,
doing a jigsaw. Exactly. It really did have the kind of isolated feel that I feel at the moment, especially if people are listening to this in a year or so and they're just listening to this between massive parties, might not feel so. But it definitely felt evocative of that.
Yeah,
sure.
And I mean, I didn't choose it for any of these reasons. And the fact that the reason for the sheep culling is also a disease that can't be cured is a little bit too on the nose, I thought. But that's why I'm trying to focus on the humour.
It's a parable for our time, and we didn't even know. I hope it's not going to end the same way, at least.
No, I certainly hope not. But yeah, it is a terribly isolating life. But this is kind of what Icelanders have been doing for over 1,000 years. Sheep farming basically is their entire livelihood until kind of the 21st century. Not 21st, the 20th century.
Well, I did actually look up that there are how many sheep there are in Iceland. Okay. Do you know this?
No.
Do you want to have a guess? So there are about 350-ish thousand people. How many sheep do you think there are?
350,000 people.
This is in 2050, which was, sorry, but that's the latest statistics for you.
That's okay. I'm going to guess something like 1 for 1. So 350,000 sheep.
No, you're way off.
What?
It's 800,000.
800,000?
In 2015, there were more than double the amount of sheep as people in Iceland.
More than double?
Yeah.
Well,
I tell no lie.
Okay. Well, I read that they were self-sufficient in meat, dairy, and eggs, which is pretty amazing for a small country like that. But 800,000 sheep. I mean, both Gumi and Kitty have a lot of sheep. I think by Gumi's perhaps slightly off count, he has 147, I think he says. So, I mean, 147 sheep per person. That's not right. What is it? Just over 2 per person in a population. But 147 per sheep farmer seems quite a lot. I don't know how many sheep most farmers normally have. But considering they haven't got anyone around them, apart from the neighbouring farmers who we see them meeting up with once or twice, their only source of conversation or contact, like actual physical contact, is the sheep.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because actually their contact with the sheep is until the end at least more intense and more kind of emotive than their contact with the humans.
Oh.
So like you see them wrestling the sheep, bathing the sheep in the bath, kind of herding everybody. Whereas with the humans, you just see these kind of, I know we have those scenes in the social club, which to me is like Icelandic Phoenix Nights, but does that not make you think of that?
Yeah.
But they were quite pared back, weren't they? They were quite kind of restrained.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to note that as soon as Gummi loses it's quite and again a kind of funny, kind of sad scene at the ram judging competition. Like all the men are standing outside with the bums of their proudest ram shoved out in front, and they're all being judged, which is inherently just a comical image. And then he loses to his brother, and so he goes straight outside and he's like, right, what makes your ram better than my ram? And he notices something that may or may not be scrapie, this horrible disease. And he instantly takes his pride and joy back home and scrubs him. And you can see how much it means that this ram, Garpur, doesn't get ill. And how much and even later on, how much it's killing him to have to get rid of his entire flock.
Í þriðja sæti Finnur Guðjónsson með hrútinn Heisa. Heisi undan kveik og góu frá Svínafelli. Hann fékk 84 stig. Í öðru sæti Guðmundur Böðvarsson með hrútinn Garp. Garpur af hinu fræga Bólstaðarkynni undan Goða og Birtu. Hann fékk 86 stig. En ég vil taka það fram að það munaði mjög litlu á tveim efstu hrútunum. Úrslitin réðust á þykkt bakvöðans. Þessir hrútar af sama kyni og sigurvegarinn í ár Kristinn Böðvarsson með hrútinn Sprota.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I made a note of that when his brother said to him, I know what you've got in the basement, his first reaction wasn't to fight back or say, I don't know what you mean, or tackle his brother. His first reaction was to run to the sheep.
Yeah, and
make sure that they were okay and guard them, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, the priority above everything else is always the sheep.
Absolutely, especially at that point as well. Like, I think they say the Bolstadr breed, which is their family's breed, if they all get killed in this slaughter, which is happening across the valley because turns out it is scrapie, if they destroy all of them, then that family has nothing going on beyond their brothers, which is, I mean, the end of a bloodline. I don't know, obviously the sheep aren't the same.
Family members.
Yeah.
No, but it was interesting in the fact that the two brothers, clearly neither of them have families or children, so they are the end of the bloodline. Yeah. And then it's almost like if the sheep also are the end of the bloodline, it's almost too much to handle them being gone.
Totally. I mean, they are basically their children. They're woolly, smelly, horned, children, I think. That line you mentioned when Gummi's like, I know what you've got in your basement. In most of the films I watch, that would be a fucking terrifying moment. Like in some horror film, if someone says, I know what you've got in the basement, it's probably not going to be some ewes and a ram.
Yeah, this is actually exactly what I was thinking. There was a very horror movie trope. There's always someone locked in the basement, and usually you want them to be found and you're like, please make a noise, escape. And in this case, it's like, don't hear them, don't make a noise.
No, and it sort of manifests itself as both funny and nerve-wracking, because He's sat there with various visitors that come round, the vet, or I can't remember who else comes round, the lawyer. And it's like, oh my God, please don't make a noise. I'll turn the radio on. And it's kind of funny. But then the second that someone hears a noise, you're like, oh no, please do not discover those rams in the basement or the sheep in the basement. It's really quite tense.
Classic that one ram just wanted to get making some babies that then destroyed everything, didn't it?
Yeah, it comes after, I don't know whether it's Christmas Day or whatever, when Gumi lets Garpur in with the ewes and, has sex with them all. But he finds out that they're all pregnant. I think Garpur is just like, oh, did a pretty good job the first time. I'm going to get back in
Give
there.
it another go. I have to say as well, I really didn't expect any twists in this film. I thought it was just going to go along at the kind of glacial pace that it was progressing, because it is quite a slow burn. But the point when he went down to the basement and you found out that he'd hidden the sheep there,
yeah,
I honestly was like, I'm sorry, what? He's got the sheep in there? I did not see that coming at all. I was genuinely surprised.
I think that's a testament to the filmmaking, especially because, like you say, it's such a sparse, slow-moving film. It's very static. If you look at the shots, they're usually quite wide, but they're very still, and they just let the action play out, and then we move on. There's very, very rarely any music. There's almost no dialogue either. And so you're kind of just watching things, daily life happen. It might not be good, but, it's happening. And then suddenly, boom, oh my God, things have taken a turn.
And also, did you feel, when we're talking about sheep in the basement, that I was like, I know logically I'm on the side of the ecologists, or whatever they would be called, veterinary
the
enforcers.
The guys from Reykjavik who the farmers hate.
Yeah, they are doing the right thing, because this disease, scraping, needs to be controlled, doesn't it? But I'm like, that's my head, but my heart is like, save the sheep, let them escape. Even though if that could lead to massive ecological collapse later down the line, I'm like, I don't care. Get the 8 of them safe.
True, because we don't know that any of the other sheep are infected, especially Gummy's. We don't know that those ones that he's kept in the basement are infected. But we do know that all the other farms are potentially infected. And we know that other farms in other valleys have had it up to 3 times. So when those sheep go off, you're sort of like, well, if you do save them, down the line, you might just be bringing it back and killing everyone who's left. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, I guess.
So definitely as well with the coronavirus parallels, it's like that thing of, it's probably fine, but you're not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at least, it might be everyone's livelihoods, but it's not their actual lives. So does that make it better?
Well, this is the debate, isn't it? The parallel. I didn't think that we'd have so many contemporary parallels.
No.
Who knew?
No, but let's not fixate on those.
No, let's not.
Talking of the sheep, though, so I was reading some interviews with the director, Grímur Hákonarson, and so a lot of the people involved were part of sheep farming families growing up.
Auntie and uncle were sheep farmers.
I think so,
is that
yeah,
right?
and he worked on the farms when he was in his teens. So did Sigurður Sigurjónsson, who plays Gummi. And also, weirdly...
That's why he's so good at handling around.
Well, quite. I think both actors, Sigurður Sigurjónsson and Theodor Juliusson, they both went to the farm early and got hands-on and sort of did a bit of farmers kind of...
method acting.
Yeah, a bit kind of Daniel Day-Lewis. But, apparently they're both big, they're 2 of the biggest names in Icelandic film acting. Obviously, as we said, there aren't many actors, but they are some of the big names. Also, while we're talking about relations, that farm that they filmed on is actually the composer's mum's farm, or she was born on that farm or something, which is mad. It's all, everything's tied together. But the thing that I enjoyed the most while we're on the farm and the sheep is that they had to actually find the right kind of sheep to use. So
what is in the most pretty sheep? Because they were very beautiful sheep.
They were good looking sheep. And I'm not, I don't know sheep very well, but yeah, they were pretty fluffy. And I think actually Icelandic sheep are, I don't know if it's unique, but they're certainly famed for having 2 sort of layers of wool, which is why they stay so warm and why the wool is so good to use as yarn, I believe. Something like that.
Wow.
But so there's all these different farms with different kind of bloodlines of Icelandic stock, which has been there for 1100 years. But they had to go around like checking at different farms whether the sheep were actually able to work with the actors and with the film crew around. They needed the right temperament sheep,
Chilled sheep.
Yeah. So the director actually said it was harder to cast the sheep than it was the actors. And so, yeah, they just went round and to see which sheep could actually handle all this noise and all this traffic and just get played with. And I think the ones they settled on were actually so docile, they'd be waiting for their own farmer to come and sort of give them a kind of scratch behind the ear and stuff.
God, that makes me feel even more sad about the thought of them getting scrapey.
Yeah.
I have to say, like, that throughout this, there's one thing just in my mind. Have you ever read or seen any version of Far From the Madding Crowd, the Thomas Hardy novel?
You know what? I haven't.
So I'm a big Victorian literature nerd, and it's a brilliant book, but it's like heavily based on sheep-based trauma. And I mean, if anybody is like 100 and whatever years on worried about spoilers, maybe just tune out for a sec. But the whole thing starts where this guy Gabriel Oak, so he's a shepherd, and his flock, his sheepdog accidentally in the night pushes his flock over the edge of a cliff, and he finds them all, so it's his whole livelihood, he finds them all dead on the beach below. God. It's like truly traumatizing read. And then there's another scene as well with sheep bloat, where all the sheep get this bloating disease because they eat this poisonous plant, and Gabriel Oak, the shepherd of fame before, has to come around with a big like jabby needle thing and stab them all in the stomach, pop them like balloons. He like pops them like a balloon, and then the gas from the bloat is released and they just get up and run off. But anyway,
so they're okay. They get stabbed with a knife and then they run away. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know about the science behind it, but all I could think of was that really. And being honestly, those scenes with the sheep have somehow stayed in my mind so long, because there's something so innocent about sheep. And I think that's something you see in this film as well, when they, when Gummy has to kill his flock and they're just so like unaware, and they're kind of just cozying up to him, not knowing anything that's gonna go on.
Oh, and
there's something so horrifying about it.
So sad when he talks to the one ewe. He's like, I'm so sorry. And then he goes and he takes his gun. I mean, can you imagine having to shoot 147 sheep in the head? I mean, that is a job for a lot of people. But I couldn't do that.
No, especially not when they've been your babies and you've had them since they were born. You probably pulled them out as lambs.
Part of the whole farming on your own thing, I don't know how they would do all of the work. I mean, it seems to just be a sheep farm, but still, that's a lot of work. Because, like, especially in this day and age, all parts of the sheep are used. So the wool gets taken off and sold to be used as wool for those amazing jumpers that they wear, the lopapesa.
Yeah.
I do have my own, just FYI. I would wear it while we record, but it's so hot that I don't think my flat would ever get cold enough.
It's because of those two layers of the sheep
There you
wool
go.
there.
Yeah. So they use the wool, they use the meat. Again, you see Gumi eating lamb broth, lamb soup, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I had an amazing lamb soup when I visited Gullfoss, the waterfall, which is on the Golden Circle tour. And it was absolutely delicious.
How can you say such a thing after seeing all those very cute sheep?
I know, but they were sheep. They weren't lambs. I mean, I'm sure they eat the mutton as well. But they use the meat, they use the wool, and, well, I guess they use the... Is there anything else? They probably use some of the milk, maybe. Sheep cheese?
I don't know. Maybe. Doesn't sound great.
I don't know. Either way, they try. I think they use as much of it as they can, and you can see that on screen. So I think there's something to be said for, okay, he's raising a lot of sheep to be used ultimately for other purposes, but when you're killing them for no reason, or for a reason that means they can't ever be used again, that's the worst thing, isn't it?
It's very, very sad.
Yeah. But on that note, should we talk about some of the funnier moments?
Yes, let's. What were your favourite?
Well, I mean, it starts off with a moment that is it's probably the most darkly comic moment that sort of sets the tone for the rest of the film. So Gummy discovers the dead sheep in Kitty's field. And there's one other sheep sort of standing around, just barring away. And he picks that one up and he just chucks it in Kitty's front door and walks away. And I was like, that is amazing. What? Why have you done that?
Sheep inside are inherently quite funny, aren't they? When the sheep's in the bath, I found that amusing.
Yeah, just scrubbing away at his horns. And they're running through the house, just like scuttling on the hard floor.
Yeah. I also enjoyed the dog delivering specifically an invoice was the one that I found funny.
That dog delivering those is brilliant. Yeah, and like you say, that moment when Kitty, he's heard what Gummy's done and reported this incident of what he thinks is Scrapey to the vets. And Kitty comes around with his gun and shoots him in the windows. I mean...
Shoots him in the windows sounds like a euphemism.
No, he doesn't shoot him in the eyes. I know they're the windows of the soul, right? But no, he shoots the window because he's so pissed off. And then Gummy just sits down and casually writes him a bill for how much he owes for the glass and stuff, which is fabulous. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. The moment, see, I think it was intended as a comedy moment, but for me, it was a moment of true horror. And I actually wrote down the word diabolical in capital letters, was the cutting of toenails with giant scissors.
Yeah.
Something that should never be allowed to happen.
It's so disgusting, but also hilarious.
Yeah. I got that it was funny, but it offended me so much that I couldn't find it. So.
I think a lot of people don't like feet anyway, let alone overgrown toenails on an old man. And he's just got those pair of big black scissors. It's like, you'd make one slip. You might just cut your toe off.
I mean, they were both quite kind of gross in their own ways, weren't they?
Yes. And I think that's that whole thing of they're just two old men, lived on their own for 40 years, lived in the same house for 40 years. Like you can see it in everything about their lives. They're focused on their farming, which is their livelihood, that the houses haven't changed since they were kids probably. Their clothes are all wholly, there was probably their mum who knitted their jumpers. The wallpaper is fucking amazing, but it is clearly not modern. And just everything about their lives is so solitary and they don't really care. And think that's kind of a male thing anyway, but they're at that age, especially in the film, where that's not really a consideration.
But don't you think as well, it's all part of this thing, which we kind of mentioned before a bit, but of the lost world or the dying world, it's a world of the past. They live in the past, don't they? They're not keeping up with the times, which is it's probably the central theme of the whole thing, isn't it? But it's written into every bit of set design or costume and everything.
Yeah, and in those small interactions when they meet with the other farmers, and there's the younger couple. I mean, they're not young, but they're, I don't know, 30s or 40s. And basically they've just gone, well, since we get paid for all the sheep that get destroyed, we're just going to fuck off now, because this isn't the life we want. It's lonely, we're losing money, and, 2 years without sheep, what are we going to do? So they're just like, okay, we'll move on. We'll modernize, and we'll just go. They don't know where they're going to go. Most likely they'll end up in Reykjavik, I guess.
But it definitely is that sense of the kind of romantic old nostalgia of the old ways. The sheep aren't just sheep, are they? They're kind of the old life. That was a very Mark Kermode of me. It's not about sheep. The sheep aren't sheep. They're a symbol of the old way of life.
Of course, and that term "old way" is exactly what the director describes it as. He's talking about that traditional Icelandic way of life, which, like I said at the start, has only relatively recently been taken over. And there aren't that many people, but there's so many more jobs available that kids on farms don't necessarily want to hang around and be sheep farmers. Having said that, I did read about one Icelandic lady who, when she was in her 20s, went to America to become a model, but came back because she wanted to work on her family sheep farm. And now she's one of the kind of foremost sheep farmers in Iceland. But I think you're right. It's that kind of dichotomy of old versus new. And in Iceland, that's a much more recent thing, I think.
And you mentioned the scene with the young couple. Oh, perhaps it's a different scene, but when they're talking about all the farmers are getting together and saying, "What should we do?"
Oh, in the house.
Yeah, and one of them says, "Oh, well, what are you going to do? Just import hormone sheep?" I think they say, from abroad, and it's this kind of sense of, it's very particular to those sheep, like those. It's like what we were saying about the brothers' flock, that if they lose them, then it's the end of a bloodline. Like that they can't just replace them with new sheep. It's not the same. It's kind of a transplanted, artificial, sterile thing, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
And I know that the officials, whatever you want to call them, veterinary officials, they're sterile because they are literally coming in sterilizing things, but they are very sterile, aren't they, in the way that they're shown, and they're very kind of grey-suited executive corporation. They're like one big body, really, rather than
they've got no sort of understanding of what it means to these people to be like, oh no, but we'll just replace a sheep for a sheep. You're like, well, that's not really what it's not the about. Point. Like, there's an honour to being an Icelandic sheep farmer, which they don't get. And I think it's quite nicely demonstrated in the scene when they're all sort of suited up in their green hazmat suits and they turn up en masse to Gummi's barn, and they kind of just walk in like these aliens, like a scene from some sort of sci-fi horror film, and just like, you look like the aliens that you are in this landscape. Like, you belong in the city. You don't belong here amongst these huge valleys of just pasture. And you don't know what you're dealing with, really. We know there's a disease, but think about it beyond that. And Katrin, I think she's like the head vet. I think she has more of an understanding, but at the same time, she's doing her job, isn't she?
Hvers vegna varstu á þessu, Gummi?
Ég vil drepa mína kindur sjálfur.
Var þetta allt saman?
Já. 147 stykki.
Allt í lagi. Rensið þetta upp. Þú verður að fara eftir reglunum, Gumi. Þú átt ekki að slátra það sjálfur. Ef við eigum að geta upprætt þennan sjúkdóm, svo verður þið að fara eftir reglunum.
So let's talk about Gumi and Kitty.
So I really wanted to know what had happened between them. What's your theory?
Well, I don't know if I came up with a theory before I read that the film was based on, well, not based on, but sort of based on a true story, which apparently is quite common. So there were two brothers who I think loved the same lady, same woman, and they fell out over her. Obviously, neither one of them stayed with her, or she didn't stay with them, more like. And so after that sort of argument, they chose not to speak to each other again, and that was that. But apparently that's quite a common thing. I don't know how common is when you're talking about a population of 350,000 people. It's
not that many women to choose from.
No, and even less who are farmers or want to be a farmer's wife or whatever. So I mean, I don't have any theories of my own. That's something. I know that the director said that he did write a sort of backstory that the actors could read.
Oh, really?
But he never wanted it explained. Did you?
Yeah, it was kind of classy to not explain it, I thought.
Would it have sort of helped? I don't think it would have, really.
No, I'm not sure it would have done. And I think it might have even taken away from the kind of universalness of it.
Yeah.
It's quite like a parable, the whole thing, isn't it? You don't need to know the ins and outs. But having said that, if I had a theory, well, I was like firmly on Gummy's side in this argument. I know that we're kind of given his perspective and we see things primarily through his eyes.
Sure.
But Kitty just seemed like a bit of a knobhead, didn't he?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because they've both lived...
On the surface, at least, until the end.
Yeah, they've both basically lived the same life for 40 years, but they've gone off in sort of separate paths, not massively different, but it looks like Gummy has managed to keep his head on his shoulders, whereas Kitty's sort of descended into alcoholism because he can't handle it. And because he hasn't got any support, Gummy's sort of stayed away and not... There's an argument to say he could have helped Kitty much more over the years.
But I feel like he's always... From what we're shown, he's always actually looking out for Kitty. So this is my interpretation, you may disagree, but when Kitty wins the prize, Gummy is initially, he's annoyed, whatever, but the second he finds out that there might be scrapey, he's concerned about his brother's flock. And I think that's because he's concerned about his brother, and he doesn't tell them because he wants his brother's best ram to be killed, in my mind. He tells them because he's scared about this disease getting out and he is concerned. Is that not how you read it?
No, that's pretty much exactly how I thought. But what does that mean for why, if they both care enough, and obviously it does seem like Gummy cares more, but we don't know because it's not told from Kitty's point of view. What the hell were they arguing about? Because it can't have been that bad that they still cared enough to make sure the other one didn't die of, frostbite or whatever. Because that's a funny scene as well.
In my mind, rather than like a big fight over a woman or whatever, it's like a generally fractious relationship that is disintegrated. We also, as well, we learn, don't we, that Gummy says, or we find out somehow that their mother didn't want Kitty to inherit the farm.
Their father didn't want Kitty, yeah.
Their father didn't want
Basically,
Kitty to inherit
it sounded
the farm.
like he didn't believe that Kitty could do it.
Well, exactly. So in my mind, Kitty is just this kind of bit of a troublemaker that then is maybe pushed out and then becomes bitter and it slowly unravels rather than a big break.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's 40 years down the line.
Exactly. 40 years is a long time for a relationship to slowly get worse and worse and more entrenched, isn't it? But something I did find funny was that, like, if you think about siblings and the way you argue with them, even though they're in their 60s, 70s, 60s, I don't know.
I don't know how old they are. I actually haven't checked how old the actors are either, but they certainly look a lot older than they do without a beard.
Yeah. Well, anyway, however old they are, that when they argue like little children, how you argue with the siblings, in that, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to have to send you a note because I won't talk to you. And then when they wrestle, when Kitty comes and pins Gummy down, it's a bit violent, but he's pinning him down in the way that, like, you do with when you're kids fighting.
Yeah, totally.
Not me and my sister, but, some people.
Well, if that was me and my brother, I'd probably be the one face down in the dirt. But yeah, no, I think you're right. But then that also means that you can have those funny moments between the two where it's like, we don't hate each other that much that I will let you open the gate and just drive straight through on my quad bike.
Yeah.
I love it. It's like the tiniest little moment, but like it could piss Kitty off, and it probably does, but it's not a big thing. But yeah, it's a very brotherly thing, I think, that kind of moment.
They were definitely kind of presented as two kind of polar opposites, or different sides of the coin, weren't they? In that Gummy was quiet and thoughtful and kind of hesitant, and Kitty was boisterous and kind of rambunctious and Santery and loud.
Santery. Because he has the white beard.
Bad Santa. The kind of Santa that you don't want to sit on his lap.
Yeah, and I think actually when Gummy runs to the basement to hide after that first initial... Is it when he shoots the window? I think it is, and he just immediately runs to the basement. I think he knows deep down that actually Kitty could do worse. And he's sort of scared for his own, maybe not life, but he is concerned that he might get injured in some way. Do you think?
Possibly, yeah. I guess he does seem quite out of control, doesn't he? In terms of like drinking and guns, which are never a great mix.
No, I don't know what the status of guns in Iceland is. I'm pretty sure, I'm sure farms do have them, but the police... I don't think the police carry guns. I don't think guns are really a thing in Iceland, or maybe they got introduced recently. But think maybe
on farms they're quite common, aren't they?
Yeah, for hunting, all sorts, for getting rid of foxes or whatever might be eating the chickens or various other bits. There aren't any other animals in Iceland, as far as I'm aware, that could actually kill any farm animals. I think the Arctic fox is the only native animal.
They're not going to be bothering with a sheep, are they?
Probably. I don't know. You know what? I have no idea. There are no foxes in this film anyway. But I think they both care about the sheep a great deal. They just do it in different ways. Because when the vets turn up to get rid of Kitty's flock, he's so mad. Yeah. It's not just that he doesn't have a livelihood. It's that he's losing his only form of contact. And so, yeah, I think they both have that in common. And that is what leads to this kind of reconciliation towards the end.
Hann ekki með eina helvítis hriðu. Þú ert bara að búa þetta til. Þú ert bara tapsár. Gummi!
Should we talk about the end?
Yes, let's go on. Well, the first thing is the snowstorm.
Yeah, the snowstorm.
How did you find it?
How did I find a snowstorm? I felt like I did not want to be there.
Yeah.
And we should say that this is at the point when the vet has heard noises in the basement.
What a little snitch,
Yeah,
anyway.
I know. I mean, it's definitely his job. But so he's heard the noise, and they managed to smuggle the sheep into Kitty's farm, hidden. I mean, the fact that then everyone goes looking for the sheep and they don't think to look in Kitty's farm is weird and hilarious.
Yeah.
But okay, I guess they figure these brothers hate each other, so why would they help each other? And then they end up taking them up to the mountains when I think it's the policeman. He just hears a rogue kind of bah, and he looks out the window and they're just all standing right in front of the window.
Yeah.
Which is excellent. So yeah, they take them up to the Highlands, don't they? And that snowstorm that they encounter is cold, windy, terrifying.
Because to me, it felt like it was kind of always a doomed mission, and that they knew that this was kind of a doomed mission. And it's like, fuck it, let's go out with a bang kind of situation. Is that how you saw it? Or do you think they really thought, we'll get him over the hill and then it'll be fine and we'll come back and have a cup of tea?
I think I'm one of those moviegoers who just lets the whole thing wash over me, and I don't actually think forwards to what I want or expect to happen. So I think the first time I watched it anyway, I thought, yes, that's it. Just, they're going to get them up that mountain. They'll be free. I mean, obviously I had no idea what was then going to happen to Gummi and Kitty, but I thought, yeah, they're going to hide the sheep and at least they'll be free. I didn't really think beyond that.
It's like a Thelma and Louise moment, you know, they're coming for us. There's nowhere else to go. Let's just leap off the morass kind of thing.
I like that interpretation a lot. But I also think the way it actually ends, that's not really... I don't think that's the case.
What do you think happened at the end? Did they die? Did the sheep die? Did they survive?
Well, they said if the sheep get high enough in the mountains, they're rugged Icelandic sheep, they can deal with that horrible snowstorm. And if
they're
they
quite close to the ground.
True, they're not going to get blown away, hopefully, anyway. I think if they get far enough away that they won't be found, so that's positive. I think the sheep are safe.
Okay, good.
But then the fact that the brothers lose each other for so long and somehow Kitty manages to find Gummi, I think is quite remarkable, because people get lost in the Icelandic Highlands all the time. Like I say all the time. It's in a lot of the books I've read. So I know that happens, and often the bodies don't get found ever, or at least for a very long time, and that's usually by chance. So the fact that Kitty found Gummi at all is quite remarkable.
Have you ever been in a whiteout?
Yes.
Because I have. I'm show off my middle class credentials here, but skiing, I've been in a whiteout.
Where was this?
And well, I've been in a couple actually. One was in Switzerland, and it was just the most terrifying thing I think I've ever been in.
Were you on your skis?
Yeah, I was on skis, but then I took them off because I couldn't handle it.
Sure.
And it was basically where not in quite such a storm as that, but still a storm, and where the edge of the cliff and the sky looked exactly the same, so you couldn't, until you were right at the edge, see it. And it really was like horribly disorientating in a way that you've never experienced. So this really was not triggering for me, but you know, I really sensed the peril big time.
Yeah, well, look, the second that they end up in the whiteout, you're like, well, how, at this point, I don't know how you're going to find your way home at all. So it reminded me, I'll tell you my anecdote anyway, because it's Iceland related also. And these kind of things happen there because the weather is so changeable in Iceland. Like, it will go from bright blue skies, sunshine, to a full-on snowstorm in the blink of an eye, and roads will be shut and people will be told not to leave the town they're in. And so I was driving there a couple of years ago in December on my own in a 4x4. I'm on the main road, the number one, the ring road, and driving along, oh, there's some snow. within 5 minutes, it was so thick I couldn't see a thing. And the clouds were white. The fields were white because it had already snowed. The roads were white. Everything was white. And the only things that helped me drive were the yellow markers on the road. I thought, I can't stop because this road is only 2 lanes wide and there is no side, there's no hard shoulder. So I'll just drive and drive. And people occasionally, you're told not to drive in whiteouts, but I didn't have a choice because it hit. But people were occasionally driving past, and that was terrifying. And I just remember sitting in the car, hands on the steering wheel, grip, like with my nails digging into my palms, eyes wide open, just slowly, they wanted to close. I was focusing that much. And it's absolutely terrifying when you don't know where you're going. I mean, thankfully I wasn't in an unknown place in the Highlands, not in a car.
Yeah.
I can only imagine how much worse it would be to be in the middle of nowhere with no protection at all.
Yeah.
So not triggering, but certainly reminded me of my own Icelandic whiteout experience. And then, of course, I got stuck in a town called Hup, spelled Hof, with a little accent on the O. Got stuck there for like an extra 2 days because no one was allowed to drive on any of the roads. So that was interesting.
Shout out to Hup.
Shout out to Hup and my friends who I met at the only youth hostel in town. Yeah, that was good times.
But I think what I realised as well in this ending was you don't ever see 2 old men embracing, 2 old topless bearded men embracing, do you, in pop culture?
That's not something often, no, that I would often see in any
I never
situation.
realised that. I never saw it until this moment.
No, it's funny, isn't it? Because actually we see them both naked during the film. At various moments. They're both usually in the bar.
It's a lot of comedy nudity.
Exactly, comedy nudity. And then we get to the end and it's like, oh no, now this is like full on dramatic.
Tragedy nudity.
Exactly. And they're clinging to each other for dear life at this point. And it's like, I love that contrast. It's like, oh fuck.
I think it's also nice in the like role reversal, in that throughout we've seen Gummy trying to look after Kiddy in some ways, even when he's just putting a blanket on him when he's naked, or doing all these kind of things. And then at the end we see Kiddy trying to look after Gummy, and that they do, deep down love each other, care about each other, want each other to survive.
It just takes that extra bit more drama for Kiddy to show it, not just oh, my brother's drunk, I'll look after him. It's oh no, my brother's about to die, maybe I should do something.
I saw that as no coming back from that. To me, they have to have died, because otherwise we would have been shown them being saved or something like that.
I don't think that the director, as an Icelander, would have given us that, even if that's what he believes.
It would have been too twee.
Very twee and kind of unnecessary. I'm a big fan of the kind of open ending. I mean, I'm a huge David Lynch fan, and I mean, a lot of the time I don't understand anything that's going on. But, I mean, that is probably true. But I do like a film when it's made well that leaves the ending open for you to interpret, not just, we didn't know how to end this. Let's just, let's let people make what they will of it.
So what did you think happened at the end?
No, I'm probably with you though. Yeah. I think, I mean, okay, the snow might, the whiteout might clear at some point. Who knows how long that would take? And even when it does, they're still at the top of a mountain with I don't know whether they'll be able to get the quad bike out easily or even find it. And then they've got to get back. I think it's kind of a lost cause because no one knows where they are.
I think as well, it's if you see it as kind of a classic tale or a parable, about reconciliation and 2 brothers coming back together, and it needs some kind of epic denouement, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And if it had just been, they saved the sheep and they both had 2 years compensation and then got some more sheep, it's not got the narrative clout of they sacrifice themselves on the altar of progress.
Sure. I mean, I guess it could have had a similarly or even worse outcome in that they could have saved the sheep, which we already think has happened in the film. But they might have made it back to their farm and they're like, okay, well, we've got 2 years without any sheep. What do we do? Kill ourselves? Maybe it's nicer that they died.
I'm glad that wasn't the ending.
Me too. I mean, sometimes I get I go a bit dark. But I think it's nice to see that if they are going to die, they've died together.
Yeah.
And that their legacy will live on through their sheep.
A noble death.
Yes, totally. And we know that the sheep are preggers, so the bloodline will continue.
I forgot about that.
I mean, that's the big positive to all of this. Provided they don't have Scrapey, then that's great. Then they'll carry on. I don't know whether any farmers will find them and take them in, or whether they'll just live as wild sheep.
They'll be the feral sheep of Iceland.
Yeah, of which I'm assuming there are none.
You're slightly more optimistic about the sheep's future than I am. But I do think it was a great ending and very evocatively shot in, close up, them shivering and their skin all mottled.
It was quite nice because it's such a personal story, but a lot of the film is shown kind of these wide landscape shots that as the film goes on get more and more wintry and desolate and just unforgiving looking, that by the end you need a return to that kind of close style of filmmaking. In the whiteout especially, it's kind of handheld and it's like, yeah, we're with them now, we're not just observing, we're actually there. And that final shot of the two of them that's up close and just like, yes, these are who we've been rooting for the whole time, we're going to leave with them. I think whether it's sad or happy, it's nice, isn't it? I have a nice fact about that scene. It was minus 15 degrees C when they recorded that, and because there are no stuntmen in Iceland, they both did all their own stunts. So I think it was a mixture of kind of filming up on the mountain in a snowstorm, which happened by chance, and then also they did a bit with kind of fans and shit, but that kind of thing is, I guess, harder to come by in Iceland, and I don't know, kind of awkward to try and get down to the farm and where they were filming and stuff. So most of it was just those two stalwart actors just like freezing their bollocks off up a mountain.
Oh God, fair play.
Good for them.
They learned how to wrangle sheep. They got naked in the cold. You can't say fairer than that.
So one final point, I just want to talk about the geography of the films that we talk about, because this is an Icelandic cinema podcast, and the films that we're going to look at are shot all over. I mean, it's noticeable that this wasn't shot in the only place most people will be familiar with, Reykjavik. This was shot actually in a place called the Barðardalur Valley, which is up in the northeast of Iceland, somewhere between Akurey, which is what they call the city in the north, which is actually smaller than like a little town in England. And it's somewhere between there and a place called Mývatn, or that's an approximation of the pronunciation, which is where they shot the, I believe, the Ygritte and Jon Snow love scene in Game of Thrones.
Oh, really? Another naked in the snow scene.
Quite. So it's shot up there on a real farm, on a real sheep farm, in an area that is all sheep farmers, and because it's so remote, everyone had to stay up there, because I think it would probably be like the best part of a day of driving to get from there back to Reykjavik. So they all stayed up there. And most of the extras were people who lived there. The guy who reads the poem at the prize giving is
he
a local...
looks like a kind of ancient wizard from Lord of the Rings.
And he was so poetic. I feel like he probably
he was brilliant.
Writes those kinds of words all the time. So he was local. Most of the extras were local. I just thought that was a really nice thing that actually doesn't really happen that much in British and American cinema. You know, people get flown in from either country for a single line often. So I thought that was nice. And a shout out to one of my favourite scenes, actually. Because coffee is such an integral part of Icelandic culture. I just thought it was absolutely brilliant where one of the other farmers, the really big guy with the beard, he turns up with a sheep carcass for Gummi. And he's like, here you go, it's Christmas. Have this sheep, which another farmer's donated. In all its goodwill, I've driven over here to you. Merry Christmas. Do you have any coffee? Because it's really cold. And I've driven all the way here. And he's just like, nah. And he's like, no, do you have anything stronger? Nah. And he definitely has both. But he's so concerned about his sheep. He's just like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Anyway, I thought that was funny.
I enjoyed that too.
Þessar.
Hvað er þetta?
Þetta frá honum Boga í Reykjadalnum. Hann á meira til ef þið vantar. Ekki heitt á kannunni?
Nei, ég held ég eigi bara ekkert kaffi.
Ekki sterkara?
Ég því miður Grímur, ég bara ekkert að bjóða þér.
Amazing. So any final thoughts?
Well, I would just say that this was much more engrossing than I think any film about two old men, one of whom cuts their toenails with the world's biggest scissors, has any right to be. And found it quite Shakespearean, I would say.
Yeah, actually, that moment up on the mountain is very King Lear, isn't it?
Very King Lear. Very King Lear indeed. So yeah, thank you for enlightening me and bringing it to my attention.
No problem. It's been fun to chat through, our first Icelandic film on this little journey. And like you said, I love that film too. I'm glad that I got a chance to rewatch it and talk about it.
So what have we got in store next?
So I think I mentioned it in our little intro episode. It's going to be a film called 101 Reykjavik, which is directed by Baltasar Kormákur. And it's kind of the film that kickstarted this 21st century exploration of modern Iceland. I thought that would be kind of a fun contrast with this film, which very much looks at traditional Icelandic ways of life. And so, yeah, this one's set in a city. It's named after the street where everything happens, the nightlife, and, the shopping, and pretty much it's where all the tourists go straight away as well. So I thought, let's look at that.
So I just have one question for you, which is, are there any sheep in it?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to say no. Yeah. And it's not even about old people.
Oh.
I know.
I'm not sure if I want to come back now.
Well, you're gonna. And she will, haha. Because next week, as I mentioned, we'll be heading down south to the city as we discuss Baltasar Kormákur's 101 Reykjavik from the year 2000. Now, this is somewhat harder to get hold of, but the DVD is out there, so it's worth checking any local rental shops or libraries. If you're in Bristol, like me, then I know 20th Century Flicks have it, but if anyone else would like to borrow a copy, just drop me a DM on Twitter, where we're at Kvikmyndapod, that's KVIKMYNDAPOD, and hit follow while you're there. We're on Apple, Spotify, and all the usual podcast platforms, so please subscribe and leave us a lovely review at Apple if you don't mind. See you next week. Tack och bless. Thanks and goodbye.